Welcome to the Optimal Performance Guide, where we have conversations with high-level humans to provide clear guidance to the mindset and habits required for optimal performance. I'm your host, Rory Cordial. Welcome, everyone. Today's show is a special one for me. I've been looking forward to sitting down with my good friend Andrew Huberman, and today is the day. Also, this is our first sponsored episode, which I couldn't be more grateful and proud to align with. The company is Madefor. For those of you who are regular listeners, first, thank you. Thank you for being curious about your own personal formula for optimal performance and just living your best life. And second, if you're new to the show, welcome. One of the Madefor co-founders and former Navy SEAL, Pat Dossett, was on the show in an earlier episode, so check that out. Pat is a very inspiring human, so I'm confident it'll be worth your time. Okay, what is Madefor? It's a 10-month program that delivers the essential science, tools, steps, and support to help you live better. In a world of quick fixes and fads, Madefor stands apart. Co-founded by a former Navy SEAL and built alongside a team of world-class experts, Madefor delivers a science-based approach to personal growth. So if you feel like you've gone off track, you're being overrun by life, or you're just ready to up your game and take back control, let Madefor be your guide and get started today. Visit getmadefor.com to learn more and use my personal code MFRORY for 20% off the entire program. Or follow them on Instagram at Madefor Madefor. Thank you, Madefor. Okay, what can I say about Andrew? He has his PhD in neuroscience. He's a tenured professor in the Department of Neurobiology at Stanford University School of Medicine. He's got his own lab at Stanford, Huberman Lab, where he has two main focuses. One, working to halt and reverse vision loss. Two, how visual perception and autonomic nervous system arousal states are integrated and impact behavior. So obviously he's super smart and driven, but what really makes Andrew special is he cares deeply about people. He's a big, strong guy on the outside, but on the inside has a huge heart and really goes out of his way to help others. Many of you listening will have heard Andrew before because he's done almost every major podcast out there. He has a great Instagram channel where he shares all kinds of actionable knowledge about neuroscience, so definitely check that out if you haven't already. In this episode, we talk about all kinds of topics, neuroscience and performance related, but really emphasize and dive deep into creativity and how the relationship between time and space and our sense perception shape our reality. Okay, I hope you guys enjoy. Enough talking, and let's get to the show. Headphones? Oh yeah, okay.
Headphones.
It's different, huh?
Well, you get a little bit of reverb in your head when you first start talking. You can hear the not reverb, but you get a little bit of the resonance from your own voice. But I just feel like the brain it's just different because you know what different. It is. There's a neuroscience thing. Okay, actually, this is a neuroscience.
This
thing.
is our start.
So who would have thought that So when this is kind of a duh when you hear it, but when you listen to something with headphones, like say if you say your name,
Rory,
I hear your name and you speaking your name in my head if I'm wearing headphones. Whereas if I took off the headphones and you say it, I hear it in the room, and that's fundamentally different. Oh yeah. Listen to music with headphones and listen to music in the room, and it's very different, right? That's the basis of the ventriloquism effect. So ventriloquism is when the person holds the puppet and is like moving the mouth, and moving the head, and they're speaking. They don't throw their voice, but your brain assigns the movement of their mouth if it's matched to the voice. If I do something like, hello, my name is Andrew, like, of course you realize I'm saying it, not the puppet, but there's no puppet on my hand anyway. But the brain starts to move the location of the sound, literally the map of the sound, to the location that matches it visually. And there's all these great experiments on the ventriloquism effect. So what we're doing now is a little bit of a ventriloquism effect, because if you speak, I hear it over here, not from over there. I hear it in my head because I'm wearing the headphones. And it has a profound influence on how we process the information. Anyway, there are a bunch of ways we could circle back to this later as it relates to hypnosis and to self-talk. I've always wanted to do this. Like, have you heard self-talk recorded through a speaker in the room versus in your head with the headphones? Totally different. Because in one case, it's self-talk heard in your head. In the other one, it's self-talk, you talking. It's uncomfortable to hear yourself in the room.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
I swear I'm sober.
Yeah, no, but the way our brain perceives senses, I'm interested in that. You spoke before about the eyes. Obviously, you study the eyes, but you mentioned how our acuity is better straight ahead, and as we get into the periphery, we're less, it's less acute, or the clarity. When I'm working with people, I will kind of like gaze off, and you can tune into the tissue or the body at like a different level of like your ability to listen with your hands and tune into the body is different. I just do it naturally, and my dad does it. My brothers do it. I was listening to a musician, Winston Marsalis, was on a podcast talking about, he's a jazz musician, and he would say that he likes to listen to other jazz musicians and would be in the audience, and when he knows when their eyes kind of gaze off, they're in the flow or the zone. Or what is that? Is that, I was wondering if like that lack of acuity is part of how we're wired to heighten our sense of touch, or like, like to be able to anticipate or take in the environment at a different level, or heightened touch, or something like that.
Yeah, and access other senses. So there's a ton to say about this. I'm not known for being succinct, so I'll try for sake of everybody's time, but I won't rush, but I'll do my best to be succinct about this. So you're absolutely right. The eye, toward the center of your eye, you essentially have what could be described as more pixels. So imagine on your phone, or with a digital camera, you take a picture and you have whatever, they'll say like 7,000 pixels or 12,000, whatever. I don't know how many it is now. It's many, many thousands of pixels. And the more pixels, the higher the resolution, right? You're just sampling space more finely. The eye isn't quite like that, because the eye has a higher density of pixels in the middle, an area that we call the fovea. And as you move towards the periphery of the eye, the pixels get bigger and you have fewer of them. So a simple way to realize this and to see and feel this is if you look right in front of you at the distance of like that you would hold a tablet or a book or a laptop or a phone, you can see quite a lot of detail and you can read fine print. If you take your hand and you move it out towards the periphery, so move it out to the side, but you keep your gaze forward, sooner or later, you can move your hand and you've got motion perception out there, but you can't actually see the number of fingers. Now, as you bring it closer, sooner or later, you can see the number of fingers. Now, the temptation is always to move your head and look at it when it's off to the side. But the point is that, and actually, for a well-sighted person, if you hold your arm out at arm's length and you raise up your thumb like you're giving a thumbs up, the limit of human visual acuity is what's called 60 cycles per degree, which sounds really technical, but what it means is if I drew 60 lines, black lines or whatever, on my thumbnail, I'd be able to say, oh, there are like a bunch of lines on my thumbnail. But if I drew 70 of them, it would look like one big white stripe. Now, a hawk can see 120 cycles per degree. So when a hawk is sitting up on a lamp post and is looking down at the ground, they can actually see the differences between blades of grass, depending on how high that they're up there. But in your peripheral vision, you can only see about 2 cycles per degree, maybe not even that. So you can see if something's moving, but you can't see what it is. Okay, so to circle back to your question, yes, the acuity, as we're describing it here, is different for the center of your visual field versus your periphery. And this can sound a little technical, and it sounds like I'm trying to be a theoretical physicist, but I'm not, when I say that space and time are linked in the nervous system. And it makes very good sense if you think about if something moves from one of those little lines on my thumbnail to the other when it's right in front of me, it moves. I can see if it moved a very small distance. Time is just, it's basically like what is the distance traveled in a given amount of time, okay? Mm-hmm. Whereas if I'm slicing time more different out in the periphery, I've got my analysis of space is different. I don't see as well out there. I have better motion detection, but I don't see as finely. So the simplest way to describe this is if you ever look at a super slow-mo video, imagine like those, basketball videos like going up for the dunk shot. Those are shot at maybe 120 or 300 or 400 frames per second. You're slicing time very thinly. So that's how you get slow motion. Whereas typical video is 60 on your phone is 60 frames per second. So you don't really get really good slow motion, although now it's getting better. So you have more frames per second at one visual location versus the other. So when you say you're working with a client, you look off to the side, and what you're doing is you're actually, without realizing, you're subconsciously switching your brain to a mode where you're analyzing time differently. You're slicing time differently. And when you move from high acuity vision, where you really focus your eyes on something and look at it and read it or scroll through your Instagram or whatever it is, to where you're not really looking at it directly, you also make real estate available in the brain to process the other senses, your hearing, your touch. The most extreme example of this would be a blind person. Blind people are really good at hearing subtle differences in where things are in the room because they analyze space and time with their hearing, not with their eyes, because they're blind. And they braille read, and they can feel really subtle distinctions in like, oh, what's that? Have you ever seen like a blind person when they're like got their typewriter off to I spend a lot of time with blind people because my lab works on vision loss in addition to other things. And they look off to the well, they're not looking, but they turn their head off to the side, and it's sort of like a natural reflex. Sometimes they're listening even to the feeling of the braille. It sounds crazy. I realize I said what I said. So
wait, you said listening to the feel, right?
Yeah,
but that's what
they're merging feel and sound. And I know I won't go totally down the rabbit hole with this, but every once in a while, it's kind of fun to think about how an animal that's not as visually dominant, but is more like olfactory dominant and relies on its nose, we see in three-dimensional space in depth. So if you're navigating, you're like, where's that thing? And where's that landmark? And is that the building? Is that the restaurant? There's the parking lot. You're walking through doors, and you're doing this all very subconsciously. A dog, or let's say another animal on a scent, they don't smell like, oh, weak smell, strong smell. They smell in depth, in odor plumes. So they can actually, it's hard to imagine because we don't do this, but they smell depth. So they can say not just I'm getting closer or I'm further away from something, but they can tell you how fast it's moving. They don't tell you. They can't tell us. If they try, we don't understand. But they can understand how fast it's moving. So they know trajectory. And you know this with sound. If you hear an ambulance go by, it's called Doppler, where it goes, brrr. You can tell which direction it's going based on the Doppler effect, the change in the sound. So to circle back to kind of more conventional life, the brain is constantly bringing in the different senses. And we use our eyes mainly, but also our head and where we tilt it, our body position, our hand position, to create these little like cones or tunnels of attention that combine. And so I was smiling when you were describing how you turn your head to the side and work with clients, because I've seen you do this before. And it's like, this is where your magic comes out, is it's like you're tuning off your visual system because you're going pure kinesthetic. It's like, how does it feel? How does the tissue feel? What's not? I don't even know what you're doing, so I'm making up a story about how you do it, even though I don't know what you do.
Yeah,
You're a Jedi. But for those of you that don't know, and you probably know if you're listening to this, but like Rory is like a total Jedi when it comes to all things movement and body kinesthetics. And you think in the kinesthetic domain. Some people think in the auditory domain. A musician would do that. Some people think in the visual domain, like our friend Michael Muller, just a brilliant photographer, right? And so it just depends on how you're oriented towards something. And yeah, you can switch these things on and off. It's why some people close their eyes when they're really thinking hard. Some people look up, and yeah.
Well, it's cool to hear that so we can fine tune our senses, or like for me, kinesthetic, or if I'm dominant, or I'm, more tuned into that sense to learn and to feel things, that just moving the head or our body naturally can amplify that sense. Has the ability to amplify that.
Well, and it's an ancient thing. So if you think about animals that will prick up their ears when they want to hear something. So imagine, I don't hunt, but
Deer.
Deer, but I do like the taste of elk and deer. So, apologies to the vegans out there, but when an animal pricks up its ears and then tilts it, they're called the pinna of the ears, which is the outside part of the ears. Humans do this a little bit. We have some people can wiggle their ears a little bit. That's a residual ability. They have neurons that innervate the ears. We all do, but animals are really good at this. And we mostly rely on vision. I mean, we orient our eyes. We do what's called foveate, so we'll bring our eyes together just a little bit. You don't realize you do it, but when you see something that's really important, both your eyes just kind of go just a little bit forward, and they lock on a particular place in space. That gives you better depth perception. It's called stereopsis. And most of us aren't, it's certainly not me. I'm not used to doing this with touch because my job doesn't rely on kinesthetic stuff. Whereas somebody who's in massage therapy or sorts of rehabilitation stuff, a painter probably doesn't even think about it, probably feels like the viscosity of the paint at the tip of the brush. They're probably not thinking about it. But the human nervous system is amazing because unlike other nervous systems, we can get really good at a lot of different things depending on our lifestyle choices and what we learn. Other animals, as amazing as the vision of a hawk is, they don't do artwork, and they might do massage. They do. I don't know. I doubt it. They don't emphasize other senses. We can move through our different senses in ways that, based on learning and experience, that other animals cannot.
How does a hawk or like an osprey navigate through the reflection of water to anticipate a fish moving to catch a fish?
This is my favorite question. No, this is like my favorite question in the whole. Did you like hack my computer or something? So
I've thought about that. I mean, seen fish hunt.
Awesome. We were friends before, but we are better friends now. So when I was an undergraduate at University of California, Santa Barbara, way back when, I had a professor. He's still alive now, fortunately. His name is Jerry Jacobs, who's like the world expert in the evolution of visual systems. He's a member of the National Academy. He's a big deal in the vision science world. He's also a super nice guy. He also had like a mean marathon time. He was like running 7-minute miles in marathons, which sounds fast to me or feels fast, when he was in his 70s.
Whoa.
So yeah, and super nice guy. So I took this course where it was all about the evolution and specializations of eyes. Everything from octopus eyes to, hawk eyes, human eyes. And so here's what's wild. The diving birds have a very important set of tasks, which is they have to navigate relative to the horizon. So they have instead of a pupil, like we have these round pupils in our eyes, and that corresponds to the fovea. That's that high acuity region we were talking about before. They don't have that. They've got what's called a visual streak. So they have the pixel density is much higher. They sample at a much higher rate in a stripe along each eye so that they can monitor the horizon as they fly. So they're like flapping around, monitoring the horizon. And they also have a pupil in the lower part of their eye. So they have what's called a visual streak to view the horizon, and they have a pupil in their lower eye to view into the water, because they have to do exactly what you described, which is when they see a school of fish, they need to ballistically dive down into the water and catch that fish. But the fish is usually moving, right? Which itself is amazing. So they have to calculate speed, trajectory. There's a lot of intense analysis. And they have to offset for the refractory index of the water, because if you've ever reached for something underwater, depending on how deep it is, it's not really in the position where you see it. They learn that. They learn to, based on how fast that fish is going, the direction it's going, to essentially dive ahead or to the side of that fish. Now, the denser the school of fish, the more likely they are to just plummet into the middle. But just taking a step back for a second, that is an incredible set of analyses. Now, they learn this through a lot of failures, and the incentive is high, because unless the mom or dad bird is going to feed you, you got to eventually get your own fish. So they learn it. But the specializations of eyes are incredible. And I won't spin off all the examples, but for instance, the elephant has a J-shaped fovea.
Not the tusk or the...
No, so the
nose?
highest acuity is in the shape of a J in their eye, so it allows them to view the tip of their trunk as they reach for things up high, because they sometimes need to go, no, not that apple, and grab it. They're very good with their trunk movements. And my favorite example of all, is the diving bird, excuse me. But my second favorite example is the sloth, because there's a sloth that has a pupil in the middle of its eye. And that's a sloth that walks along the jungle floor and eats and does its thing and whatever it is that sloths do. But then some sloths hang upside down. The three-toed sloth hangs upside down, and its pupil is on the top of its eye so it can view the jungle floor. No way. So this is wild, because what it means is that the body plan and the way that our senses are organized are tightly tied to the niche in which our species evolved. And it's not due to learning during development. It's not like if you took a diving bird and took it out of that environment, you change the way the eye works. The brain, so all the eyes are part of the brain. I've said that many times before publicly, but they really are part of the brain. The retina is part of the brain. But the rest of the brain is really good at adapting to whatever you give it. So the person that's blind from birth, for instance, they don't just leave a bunch of empty real estate in their brain where vision would be processed. They use that for heightened auditory processing, to get better at somatosensory processing, touch. And if you were to take one of these diving birds, and you wouldn't want to do this because it would be cruel, but put it in a situation where it couldn't fly and dive, the eye would still be the eye and would be organized the way it is, but the brain would adapt and would shut down the circuitry that would correspond to the stuff for diving and horizons, and would do something different with it. But there are limits to that, whereas the human brain has a very long period of plasticity where it can do stuff. So in any case, every animal has a different visual system depending on its niche. And there's some animals like, those naked mole rats, those like hideous things with the teeth. Mm-hmm. Some people think they're kind of cute, but I think they're pretty ugly. Even though they deserve our love and respect, they're pretty ugly. They have little tiny residual eyes. They barely see at all because they live in holes. They don't need the eyes. So they use their brain the visual brain for something else.
Do they have really good touch, probably, or hear? They must sense space.
So this is really cool. So there's a guy at University of Connecticut named Bruce Goldman who worked on these animals for years, and Bruce is a really terrific scientist. You can look up his work if you like. They sense space on their body because they're constantly rubbing against each other, moving through these like very complicated naked mole rat societies underground. They have narrow tunnels, and they can sense space. They also pass hormones through the skin from one to the next, which technically makes those pheromones, because that's the definition of a pheromone. They're constantly, I was going to make a bad joke about them rubbing off on each other, which just means that they're influencing each other, by the way. And that was a completely PG-13 statement. They're basically rubbing hormones from one to another. They're sensing space because they don't see. So like with your eyes closed, you could try this. Like, how would you sense space? Well, you could touch things with your hands, but they've got this, they have to walk on their hands. So the star-nosed mole, that thing is chock-a-block full of sensors. There's a woman at Berkeley, Diane Bautista, who studies that thing is like, it's like having 20,000 fingers. Whoa. And it can sense variations in the dirt, and it can smell things. And so, Yeah, when we think about life and the way that we interact with the world, we are thinking about it through a very limited set of sensory filters. And all you have to do, and it's kind of a fun thing to do, we have these in our lab, is throw on a pair of night vision goggles. We have them not because we do kind of cool military stuff, but because we do some experiments that require we be in the dark. We need to see. So if you spend a little while in night vision goggles, you start to appreciate what it is to have infrared vision. And it's especially cool to be in a room with people that don't have that on, and they're like groping around. They don't know where anything is, or they sit very still, and you have full mobility. You're moving about. You are essentially a night vision animal at that point. And it's a total trip because you realize that some people are like, we're in a simulation. We're not, I don't know. I don't think we're in a simulation, but our experience of the world is bound and limited by the number of sensory channels that we can perceive. The way to think about the color spectrum is I was talking to a friend of a mutual friend this morning, Coleman Ruiz, former SEAL team guy who is also very active in the kind of like human performance space now, and does really interesting work with teams and this kind of thing. And he's very interested in neuroscience. And Coleman, we were talking a little bit about this, and Coleman was like, yeah, I always just think of it like the spectrum of light. And since he said it better than I could, I'll just quote him. He said, we see in one portion of the spectrum, but there's all this other stuff. There's infrared, there's UV, and it's there.
Radio waves.
We just don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't see it. And if you put on the right apparatus, or if you're a different animal, you see it, and it means everything is different. We would be emitting heat right now. I'd be able to if I was a pit viper, I'd be like, oh man, you're high metabolism right now, right? Or you're cold right now. I would just have to look at you and know that. So I love thinking about this because I love animals, but it also gives us a window into how limited, but also how fantastic our nervous system is. Mm-hmm. It's a bunch of like tuned little antennas.
How much can we tap into that broader electromagnetic spectrum, even though we can't see, like I can't see your thermal, or infrared, I can't see the heat, but am I able to train, like I can feel heat off the body just from working with the body for so long. So like, what's that? Is that
well, so it's unlikely. It's unlikely that anyone has some receptor that other people don't have. Like, I mean, we can't rule it out completely, but it's very unlikely that there's somebody walking around who sees in the infrared without infrared goggles, right? Or who can sense heat emissions without, putting on some piece of equipment. So what different people can do, though, is use their senses in different combinations. So you were describing the jazz musician who can, maybe take less visual information in and start to allocate more mental energy and focus towards other senses. And that those unique combinations of senses will afford them an ability other people don't have. We can all sense heat with our hands, but I've never put any practice to getting better at it. And if I put practice getting better at it, I'll get better at it. So if it's a source of information and it's important, you will start to rewire the brain circuitry that represents that. Because we have maps of, it's a little complicated to think about, but we have maps of all this stuff in our head. So you literally have a map of your body surface. It's called a homunculus in your head. So much so that if I stimulated like the hand region of your cortex, you would feel it in your hand. And if I stimulated it in the hand representation of your motor cortex, you would move your hand. You would have no control over it. You would just do this, which itself is amazing because it means that the brain controls the body, not just that the body controls the brain. It's totally bidirectional. So the experiences are different for different people depending on their job tasks and their upbringing. But for the most part, we all have the same receptors. Now, there's one category of exception that if I had said this like 10 years ago, people might, wonder whether I was completely sane. I mean, they might wonder anyway, but, and that's magnetoreception. So turtles that migrate long distances do that through magnetoreception. They can sense magnetic fields. They have neurons that fire when magnetic fields change in a very systematic way. There are birds that migrate long distances by looking at polarized light, which for your optics savvy folks out there will make sense. But, you know, when you hear about like polarized, non-polarized sunglasses, it's a little bit like that. You can filter that stuff off or not. And they're birds that migrate long distances by looking at the polarized light because it gives them information about solar angle and day and night and whether or not they're going north or south. They don't think north, south. They don't use compasses. They just do that stuff. So humans, it seems, there was an article published in Science, have kind of weak magnetoreception. So there are these crazy devices that almost look like tinfoil hats, like that you put people in and you put them in this big cage to eliminate electric noise. And it looks like some bizarre science fiction experiment from the 70s or something. But if you ask people, where is this magnetic field strongest in this environment, you know, maybe divide it into a couple locations in front of them, they're better than chance at detecting the magnetic fields, but it's still weak. It's a weak magnetoreception. And it can be improved with training, but that says that, you know, we do have some magnetoreception. Now, of course, in fairness, maybe we haven't done I mean, those weren't my experiments, but maybe the scientific community hasn't done the killer experiment that would show that, I'm making this up now, by the way, that, for instance, maybe there's strong magnetoreception in the gut, for all we know. It's just the experiment hasn't been done. And then people always say, well, why haven't they done the experiment? And it was like, all right, well, if you send me $500,000, then I'll hire the postdoc and the student to do it. You know, research is expensive, and people are mostly focused on trying to deal with things like autism and schizophrenia and Parkinson's and all the other major issues that harm society in ways that I think everyone would agree would be great if we could resolve. So magnetoreception isn't high on the list of important problems right now for the very limited number of taxpayer dollars for research, but someday someone will get around to it.
What about, I've heard the brain, you know, our nervous system, our central nervous system. I've heard our heart has its own nervous system. Stomach, the enteric, has its own nervous system. The heart, tell me if this is accurate, having a stronger electromagnetic field to the brain. Is that accurate or not?
So, well, each one of those, every one of our organs is innervated by nerves. So it's woven into the nervous system in a very intense way. Intense meaning lots of nerve endings there. A good example was...
Sorry to interrupt. Is it all, like, the nervous system's the nervous system, and we separate to try to understand at a deeper level? Would you say, like, it's...
Yeah.
We do that, obviously, with everything.
We do
part
that.
Of science.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are lumpers and there are splitters, right? But you got to split someplace. I mean, you can't go into science and say, I'm going to study the whole brain or the whole body. So you got to, you know, we have cardiologists, we have neurologists, so that the fields of medicine are generally not integrative across the whole organism. Now, some people think very broadly about how things interact across organs. This actually, I won't do a whole history lesson on this, but for those that are interested, there's a wonderful book called The Prince of Medicine, which talks about Galen, also called Galen. He was the physician to Marcus Aurelius, the famous Stoic, that now everyone's excited about Stoicism. I actually lost a lot of respect for the Stoics when I read the book, because it turns out that the Stoics believed in all these, first of all, they didn't want people to dissect people, even cadavers. And so for like 2,000 years, there was a lot of stuff that was just made up that people accepted because they wouldn't let them dissect cadavers. There was a lot of animal experiment. They were allowed to do animal experiments. There's actually a case for, I don't want to get into the controversies around animal research, but certain things are different in animals. And so Galen couldn't work on humans, even deceased humans. So he went and worked on gladiators because they'd get like a big abdomen slash, and then he would dig around in there a little extra, or they'd have like a fractured skull. And so he could do experiments. And he said, look, we've got all these things called organs. And at the same time, they're all linked to one another. Like when I squeeze, he wrote this kind of stuff. Like when I poke on the liver, the heart changes its heartbeat. When I squeeze the heart or I tie off a valve, the liver turns a different color. And when I do things to the brain, or when the brain is damaged, this other stuff happens. And so it was about 2,000 years later before we really got all this. Also because, and I'm going to lose some friends here, but because some really annoying philosophers who were really good at math but really bad about thinking about biology started creating ridiculous conversations that still can't be solved, like the mind-body problem, the brain-mind problem, and just discussions that are interesting, but we're way behind in medicine as a consequence of getting really distracted about those things, in my opinion. And I'm sure I just alienated like half the listeners who, it's fun discussion, but what it turns out that all the organs are linked, and the nervous system is brain, spinal cord. Remember, brain includes eyes. And then the peripheral nervous system. And a really good example would be the spleen. So someone earlier today said, what does the spleen do? Well, the spleen is an immune organ. It creates cells that go and combat infection, bacteria and viruses. But you ask, what's the signal for the spleen to deploy these immune cells? Like, does the spleen just sit there and go, oh, is there anything in the body that's like bothering me? Does the person have a cold? No. The nervous system, through the splenic nerve, right? The splenic nerve sends a signal and says, I'm really stressed, I'm really hot, I don't feel good. And then the spleen goes, oh, and it's a dumb organ. It just goes and releases all this stuff. No disrespect to the people who work on spleen, but it's not a thinking organ. So likewise, the heart has a lot of neural innervation, as you mentioned, the enteric nervous system of the gut, and all of these are linked. And so nowadays, I think, brain, mind, I don't even distinguish. Some people are like, well, that's the interesting discussion. Yeah, but what's the question?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the question? I think brain and body are linked through the nervous system, and body is sending brain information through the nervous system too. So we're like a two-way superhighway. And it is true that the heart has very strong effects on all the other organs, maybe more so than like the liver or something like that. But it's all interwoven in a way that it would be hard for me to say, you've got that the nervous system part of the heart is way more important than the nervous system part of the pancreas or something like that.
In embryology, what comes first, the heart or the brain?
That's a good question. So
Wikipedia says like the heart.
Oh, well.
Or Google, but I know you know.
Yeah, I started off in developmental neurobiology. I teach it, so I'll go on record here saying they more or less develop at the same time. It's
and just because it doesn't mean it's more important necessarily, but I just thought that's an interesting lens to look at. Just embryology is fascinating and how we develop from one cell to trillions. So
I mean, you have a child now that's how old?
He's 15 months. Yeah,
right? So it's crazy, right?
Unbelievable.
Development is, I love development. It's still, to me, one of the most amazing things. It's like, look, everyone knows this, but if you just think about it, it's like sperm meets egg, okay? At the location where the sperm enters the egg, it's called the sperm entry zone by biologists, a little lip of tissue forms, like a little indentation. That's where the nervous system will form. So the whole business of development is about breaking symmetry. You've got this beautiful round egg, and all of a sudden it's got a little dimple in it and a little fold. And that little fold then turns into a tube across the rest of the egg. And inside the big globe of the egg, there's duplications. You're getting more eggs and more eggs and more eggs. So now it's a big ball of eggs. It's called a blastula, which literally means a ball of eggs. Okay. And then across the top, imagine like a piece of like putty that's kind of strewn out across the top. That's going to be the nervous system. Now the body is developing inside of the bigger egg, and the nervous system is developing on top. So when you ask, is it the heart or the brain that develops first? They're developing simultaneously, although at different rates. And they each have their own neural components. And the amazing thing is, it's just cell duplication after cell duplication. And so you're just getting tons and tons. They're called daughter cells. You're getting tons and tons and tons of daughter cells, tons of proliferation. And so that ball of eggs is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And pretty soon it starts folding over on itself.
That's amazing.
And the folds, and then pretty soon it gets these little outpouchings, which are the limb buds. And I don't have children, but I've been fascinated by embryology forever, ever since I got into science. And it's incredible. One of the most fun times I ever had in science was my graduate advisor when I joined her lab. She said, you should just take one night and just watch development. And I was like, what do you mean? And so what she did is she fertilized some zebrafish embryos for me, some zebrafish eggs. They weren't embryos yet. And they're clear, so they're optically clear. And you sit down, I had some food, I had some music. I sat down in the microscope, and you watch an egg duplicate, and you can see all this down the microscope. And 12 hours later, a fish, a little larval zebrafish, swims away.
Whoa.
And
you
so
sat for 12 hours?
I got up from time to time.
Wow.
But you're sitting there just watching. I mean, I don't want to get biblical about it, but you're watching the genesis of an animal and it forever changed me. Like if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I'm good because I've seen this thing. And for the parents out there, and even for those of you that don't have kids, like just think about that. All of the programs for generating a human being are contained in this DNA that's just A's and G's and C's and T's, right? The genetic code. And embryology is just about cells next to each other saying, hey, we got a lot of these eye cells, like let's make some eyelid cells. And then the eyelid cells going, oh wait, hold on, no light's going to get in here unless we create like an eyelid opening, because that's actually what happens. You see the baby in there or the animal in there and its eyes are closed, and what happens is the cells along the eye opening get a signal from the eye to die. So the cells die in a little strip, like,
wow.
And then that's where the eyelid will open. And so you have two processes going on in embryology. One is signals that say, really three processes, sorry. Signals that say, let's make more cells. Let's make more of what's ever happening. And then you've got signals that say, wait, hold on, we have enough. Let's make less. And then you've got signals that sometimes say, you know what? Let's make more of something different. And the way they do that is not by talking to one another. It's not even by turning on their own genes. The way they do it is by talking to one another and saying like, oh, it's kind of crowded in here. I think
Like the mole or
like,
whatever.
Like the mole rat. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, this is somewhat an abstract and topical view of embryology, but it's incredible that all the information to build a very complicated nervous system that comes into the world to learn even and self-organize is contained in 2 cells of information, right? Sperm and egg. And that the fish experiment is the most like exciting thing I've ever seen in a laboratory in one moment. I've had some great results, but like to stretch out that moment to like a 12-hour block, I guess that's a moment of some sort. And because you realize, you go, this is happening all the time. And this is, you think differently about yourself. You're a collection of cells. And I know that's kind of a duh. Everyone goes, well, of course you're a collection of cells. You think I'm an idiot? But there's something, I don't know, to me it's still profound. Maybe I'm just too easily dazzled by biology, but it's incredible.
Yeah. Even planting a seed and maybe 30 days later, if you water it like a plant for a flower to come up is amazing. So
Amazing. And
I would love to see the fish. Like 12 hours is nothing.
12 hours.
Right?
We could do the experiment. You need a very low tech microscope. Okay. You need a little bit of water and zebrafish embryo you can get at your fish store if you want. I don't really want people doing experiments at home, but I'll set it up for you. When Jax is a little older, we should do that for him. This is why I think every child should have a fish tank, provided they're able to take good care of it. I used to set up fish tanks for my friends' kids.
Really?
Because oftentimes like new life crops up in there. The snails are doing their thing and the fish are doing their thing, and then you got some baby fish, and you get a lot of the life cycle. And I have total respect for fish, but it's a different thing when like one of your fish kind of like craps out than when like the cat or the dog, right? I just can't, I guess I am a little bit of a speciesist. I can't really put my bulldog on the same, stance with a goldfish or something. You can get pretty attached to anything, but kids, I think, in a very kind of low bar way, can really start to see the cycle of life, and it's happening fast enough that they can see cool stuff. So it's, but it's not so slow. It's not so fast that like it's over in a day or two. Anyway,
how much with the brain and for us learning, like if the eyes bump into each other, and if they bump into each other and then they die off to signal to allow the light to come in, how much do we have to fail? Like, is it all about failure for our brain to learn versus, because this whole idea of perfection that stops a lot of us from doing maybe certain things that we want to do, is it just the biggest illusion there is? Like,
so are you talking about during like embryology or in
well, just
learning?
That idea of like, I think more learning, but that idea of failure being just like, it's just part of is it part of our nervous system, like how we develop, how our brain can into the neuroplasticity, like is failure critical to us learning and growing? Maybe.
So if we're thinking about like, if we take like acquisition of new motor skill, you work with some tennis players, right?
Mhm.
Okay. I don't play tennis, so I don't know anything about tennis except that it's a net and a ball and 2 to 4 people hitting it back and forth. But there's a guy at Harvard. He's Hungarian. His name is hard to pronounce, but so I'll get it wrong. Bensolevsky. He's a really nice guy, and he studies motor learning. And he has these beautiful videos of Federer.
Federer.
Yeah. Okay. So his serve and the trajectories that the racket takes in like 100 serves. And it basically looks like one line. It's a very narrow line. So they've overlaid line after line after line after line. And then they show the trajectories of the racket in somebody that's learning how to serve. And the lines are like it's a huge swath. It's like a big spaghetti mess of lines over these videos. And as that person gets better, now none of them achieve the Federer serve, I'm guessing, but what you're essentially doing is error correction. You're gradually measuring, oh wait, the ball went over, or it hit the net, or it didn't go right, or I missed entirely, whatever it happens to be, until you're essentially generating you're creating narrower and narrower cone of error. That's most of motor learning. And it has a very well-established physiological basis, which is that early in development, we see this also, like a little baby that's like flopping around, and then they eventually learn to ambulate, crawl, walk, run. The motor neurons in the spinal cord that innervate the muscle fibers and cause the muscle fibers to contract, which is how we move our limbs. Early on, they're multi-innervated. Its motor neurons are connected to many different muscle fibers. But by time you reach, teenage years or so, it's one-to-one. And then you have to work with those one-to-one connections, and you have to recruit different motor units. Now, the exercise physiologists will understand what I'm talking about, but you have to recruit the units in the right order, right? Like, are you going to move with the more proximal, meaning close to the midline limb, or then the more distal limb first, and in what order and with what force? So there are two kinds of learning. One is the developmental learning where you're shaping the neural connections themselves. And then there's the kind of learning where you're taking existing neural connections and you're modifying the sequence in which things are done. And that largely has to do with a brain area called the cerebellum. It's an area we don't really talk about much. It literally means mini brain. And it looks like a little mini brain stuffed in the bottom back right above the spinal cord is where you'll see it in the, even though it's kind of up a little bit higher, but that's where you'll see it in the human. And it has its own map of the body surface. There's a lot of people who don't know this, but you have a homunculus, a body map in the front of the brain, and you have another one in your cerebellum. Mm. And it's actually represented on both sides of the cerebellum. So and the map there is very interesting because the map is of body space, but it's also has a lot of timing information. So it's about the movement of different limbs and their timing. And so a lot of motor learning, like the example of the serve, is done in the cerebellum. And we always think of the cerebellum as balance, but the cerebellum has a lot of other functions besides balance. I don't know if I answered your question correctly. As you learn, is it all about eliminating things? No, occasionally you're making certain nerve connections stronger. You're really emphasizing certain nerve connections. We think about motor learning, but it's muscle memory, but most of that is neural in a basis, although the muscle probably has some recollection too. Like if you lift very heavy objects, you can actually change gene expression in the muscle fiber itself. It could, hypertrophy or build higher contractile strength and that kind of thing. And Andy Galpin will probably correct me on the use of some of my language because I'm not a muscle physiologist, so forgive me, Andy. But I think last time I checked, I think what I said was more or less correct.
For information traveling through the body, what's the speed? What's the fastest? Like electrical impulse going along like an action potential with the nervous system or hormones or blood, lymph. There's all these different fluids and traveling through our body all the time. They all carry information and, is there like something that's the fastest? Is there, or is it not that simple?
Yeah, no, it's the question. So we can divide things into categories. So there's endocrine signaling, which is generally hormonal. And endocrine signaling is sort of like if I wanted to send a bunch of people the same message, I'd probably send them an email, like if it was like 100 people. endocrine or hormones are things that are secreted from one organ of the body and travel and have effects on lots of different other organs. That's pretty slow because it's got to go through the bloodstream. There's some fast hormones like adrenaline released from the adrenals, immediate effect. And then there's some slow ones like the steroid hormones like testosterone and estrogen work a little bit more slowly, or prolactin. Pheromones are molecules that are made by one member of a species that go and act on another member of a species. And that's even slower. So yes, there are very strong pheromone effects between individuals. And animals also, like the hunters listening to this will know, for instance, that like elk and other animals they do something called flemming, which is where they lower their lip like this, and they actually have little sensors in their lip that smell the odors from conspecifics that they are in heat. So the males will phlegm. They'll go like, where are the females? And they're actually trying to catch pheromone molecules from the females in the environment and then go mate with them. Wild. So that's really slow, right? It's like carried by the wind. Then there's endocrine, organ to organ. Then there's neural. And neural is at the speed of electricity. So that's the fastest that we're aware of. But within the range of neural, within the category of neural, there's a range. So there's neuromodulation. So things like dopamine, serotonin, epinephrine, and acetylcholine are generally kind of slower than what we call fast synaptic transmission. Now, the best example of fast synaptic transmission was that we want nerve to muscle connections to be reliable. So I can lift up my hand, lift up a glass every single time until I get too tired and I fall asleep. But there are no failures of that. Whereas there's some areas of the brain like that are involved in thinking and imagination, or if you want to write a new song or you want to write a book, you can afford some failures, right? And if you put a gun to my head and you said, get it right this time, I might get it right a little bit quicker, but you can't force that. So nerve to muscle connections are what we call very reliable. And when we say reliable, what we mean at a cell biological level is every time I decide to move, to have a motor neuron twitch muscle and move that limb in a certain way, it releases neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitters are like just little puffs of chemicals into the area that's surrounding the next neuron, and then the next neuron becomes electrically active. So it just falls like a bunch of dominoes. And so the chemicals for fast synaptic transmission are very reliable, and they're woven into areas of the body that have to work. And the best example of this within the muscle system would probably be the heart or breathing, because you can't afford to get that wrong for terribly long. You're dead.
Yeah.
Did I say something wrong? Yeah. Okay.
You're dead.
Or you're dead. Yeah.
You have to breathe.
So, at that point, there's no nerve transmission.
I work with a lot of creative people, and I'm curious about the brain's ability to pattern recognition as well as prediction. How important is the brain? How does that work? How is the brain predicting what's going to go on? And how do you find, if some of the most creative artists and musicians, the way that they hear something, there's inspiration everywhere, and the way that they're inspired by something, they see some pattern in this painting that sparks a song, or you know what I mean? How does that work?
Yeah. Why are creative people so crazy? No, I'm just kidding. The creative people are just creative. They're just brilliant, but they are different. Like strong, like heavily creative people are different because for the following reason. So kind of takes us back to this whole space-time thing. The brain and the nervous system are always predicting things. And when we say things, it's the nervous system wasn't designed to predict whether or not a particular person is going to walk down the stairs, or whether or not an animal is going to hunt you, or whether or not you're going to marry the person you're going to marry. It doesn't work like that. It runs statistics, not to get technical here, but it just runs probabilities. It's like you don't have to be alive and on this planet very long to realize that objects fall down, not up. So the brain creates this expectation that when something falls, it's going to fall down, or maybe when it falls and it falls down, you get yelled at. There'll be a loud noise soon. And it doesn't analyze every little thing. It starts creating categories of relationships. Now, the visual system is a great example of this, because if I move my hand up and down, for instance, or if I see a car drive by, depending on the speed it's moving, I can predict where it will be in a moment. right? Like if I were to suddenly start moving my hand very slow, it would be weird because it's a weird movement for me in this regime, right? Whereas if we were doing something else, it wouldn't be that weird. So there's the updating of expectation and prediction is very fast. Because if I suddenly started speaking really slowly, you'd be like, are you okay?
Yeah.
Right? So, but if I spoke more slowly than I do, it might be fine, right? So we're always doing this. In fact, if we run our hand across a surface that has texture, then very quickly you start to get what's called the periodicity, the distance between the lines. You can just figure it out to the point where if you went like this, you could probably make a pretty good guess with your eyes closed. So you're doing this at the level of the periphery, the eyes, the skin, the nose, the mouth. When you bite into an apple, you expect it to taste like an apple. And if it didn't, you would notice immediately, right? So you're doing this from the first stages of neural processing. So space and time and expectation are very closely linked. Now let's think about what creativity is and then the opposite of creativity and what that is. Because oftentimes when you want to ponder something, it's helpful to think about its opposite. So for those of you who are like consciousness junkies and you really want to have that conversation, if you want to understand consciousness, then you got to think about what it is to be not conscious, right? You can't just make up some pithy argument about what consciousness is. You have to talk about what it isn't also in order to get there, right? Mm-hmm. And just as a useful guide. So when we start thinking about creativity, we should think about the opposite as well. So I define creativity as thinking of new things or reorganizing existing concepts or objects or whatever in new ways. Something's different. And so what you're really doing is you're either taking existing objects and organizing them differently in space and time, or like in the case of a Steve Jobs, you're trying to imagine entirely new objects, which itself is actually a pretty hard exercise. But it's kind of cool because that's kind of the essence of creativity, is to take your pre-existing notions of space-time relationships. I don't mean the cosmos. I mean space and time through the senses, and reorganize them, reshuffle them in ways that matter. Now let's come up with an example that works but is amusingly terrible, which would be me trying to play music. So I could sit down and say, give me a song, Rory. Like mention any song. Like I don't know. I'm not going to sing either way.
Songs.
Okay, like
I'm also really bad with names of songs. Like I know, I can recognize faces, I can recognize songs, but naming a song or naming the artist,
all right. Well, I think one of the Eddie Van Halen.
Jump is Van Halen.
Jump and Van Halen and Eddie Van Halen just died. So out of reverence for him, like that song, people have an expectation, right? People have an expectation about how that song is played. Now,
Don't Worry, Be Happy.
Don't Worry, Be Happy is a good one. But so I could play like a punk rock version of that one. Don't worry, be happy. Whatever, or I could do a hip hop version of it. I could do it, but you're going to know it's Don't Worry, Be Happy because the relationship between the notes is still in the same sequence. The inflections can change, like I could whisper it or shout it or whatever, but I could use different tone of voice. I would do it poorly. I don't have a good singing voice, but you would recognize it as the song. But now what if I were to abstract it where for every don't and for every worry, instead I just say apple and gorilla. So now I could say, well, that's the song to me. I'm just going to abstract it and I'm going to just do that. And it would be a terrible song. It would have no meaning. It would just be a terrible song. It wouldn't sound good. It would take a good-ish song with a great message. Don't worry, be happy. It's almost impossible to do, by the way. Don't worry, be happy. Okay. And convert that to an abstract representation of the song. And I could say, well, I'm being creative. And you'd say, well, your creativity is pretty poor. And I'd say, no, actually my creativity is great, but you'd be right. And the reason you'd be right is because I took a simple rule of just replacing two of the words with something else. Now that's being creative, but it's trivially creative. But it is an organization of space. I organize the elements differently. Now, what if we say, don't worry, be happy? We keep the words the same, but now I just say them backwards, right? Well, that's changing the time sequence, right? Space-time reordering, but it's just shuffling, but it's not shuffling it in any interesting way. So creativity is just taking existing elements, existing paints, existing notes of music, new words, new clothing, if you're into fashion, new ways of movement, new ways of moving a basketball, new ways of thinking about a scientific experiment, whatever, and organizing them in new ways through space and time. So in order to do that, you have to break some pre-existing rules. And the question is, if you're going to be creative or you're trying to access that process, which rules are you going to break? They have to be the same elements, and you're dealing with space and time. But I decided to just swap words. That's lame. I decided to swap the order of the words. That's also lame. It's creative, but it's not interesting. Making a color movie just black and white that's not that creative. So when you start to think about like a cool movie like Memento, where the guy has no memory and you realize that you are carrying information that he's not having. It was a cool movie because you have access to information the characters don't about their own story. Then you start thinking like, cool, now this is kind of a space-time warp where I got to think about what's happening differently. And it ended up being kind of cool. I don't know that it was the best movie I ever saw, far from it, but it's pretty cool. So creativity is a restructuring of something in a way that, for whatever reason, stimulates a sense of delight. And this is key. So if I was like, oh, I'm going to start making movies, which I'm not, by the way. I'm going to start making movies, and at the end, everyone's going to be pointing a gun at one another and going to kill one another. You'd be like, Tarantino movie. That's like his thing. That's like his signature thing. And he probably, I don't know if he was the first one to do it, but he'd probably be like, that's my thing. Like, you know, so it's not really original. What is original is the first time you see one of his movies and you go, oh, wild. Like normally this is not what I see at the end of a movie. And the sense of delight is very important because the dopamine system, this reward system in the brain, when it sees a space-time relationship that's novel, but triggers a potential new set of rewards or creates a whole set of ideas of what this means, you get this sense of awe or delight. Now, it's sort of like I think the first time I saw one of those Cirque du Soleil things, like it was like that. I was like, I can't believe they're riding the motorcycles through the globe. Like, I mean, at some point, acrobatics are ridiculous because they just become like extreme and dangerous. At some point, everything is ridiculous. So the key is, with creativity, is how do you create that sense that there's a whole lot of other information to come from something? And comedians do this beautifully. They pick some topic, they drill into that topic, and they create a case for it. And the reason it's funny is because it violates some rule that you had about the way that the world works that creates a whole set of other implications. Mm-hmm. And then they usually close the hatch and just move on to the next thing because that's how they go. They're kind of quick. Creativity on the basketball court is like when you have to have a certain skill set. I should mention that in order to rearrange elements and be spontaneous, you have to have the elements worked into the musculature, right? So when a team is moving down court and all of a sudden they do something amazing, you go, oh my God, it's oh my God, because you didn't realize that could happen. And you're not thinking about it consciously, but the reason it's cool, it's not just like somebody moving down court, spinning the ball on a finger or something like Harlem Globetrotters kind of stuff, right? Is that when you see something really exciting happen in sport, it means that that's possible in the future. And you don't go, that's possible in the future, like a scientist would, but you think, oh my goodness, this changes the game. This changes the space-time element. In football, It's like just, you got to get first downs, you got to get to the end zone. But when you see something truly new, it sparks a whole set of categories in the brain of new operations. And so the way I'm defining creativity is rearranging existing elements in new ways in space and time, or thinking up new things entirely. But good creativity is the kind that sparks entire categories of new space-time understanding in the viewer, right? Because if I'm an abstract artist and all I do is smear mud on a little bricks and like tell you how incredible it is because of what it, no one's done this before, like that's lame. It doesn't open up anything new. Mm-hmm. It doesn't do anything exciting. But when somebody breaks a rule, a space-time rule, I'm not talking about an ethical rule, but when someone breaks a rule in a way that opens up new possibility of thinking, that's when we go, oh, like the game has changed. And I'm sure we can all think of examples. Like I can think of it growing up skateboarding where you'd see someone do something, you're like the, first time anyone actually did like legitimate, ollie you're like, oh my goodness, like they don't need to grab the board. And then it's like first time someone's like flipping it. Now that's a skateboarding example, but there are a lot of examples of this. And this is why when some people go look at abstract art and they see like a Rothko or something, they're like, oh, it's like just 2 squares. Why is that worth $4 million? Like It's because they don't understand the rules of art, so they don't understand what was broken, and so they don't understand the implications, which were that, for instance, Rothko opened up a whole new dimension of way to use color because he eliminated the white space between things with the paint, plus other things. It's like it opened up all sorts of possibilities in the color space. And you don't look at it and think, oh, now there's so much possibility in the color space. You don't do that. Your brain does it subconsciously.
Yeah.
So I know I went on long there, but I hope that makes sense, because for the creatives out there, the challenge is like, how do you know when you've broken rules in a way that open up a lot of possibilities? Well, the pros, the people that are really good, they know, because they know the rules so well that subconsciously they know all the implications of the rules. Now, in sport, it's usually about attaining a particular goal. And I want to distinguish between spontaneity and impulsivity, because impulsivity is like just doing whatever just to see what happens. Spontaneity is when you're taking rules and doing them without much forethought. And you sometimes do them in a way that creates new outcomes. And, I don't know much about jazz, but from what people, and the reason I don't know much about jazz is because when I was a kid, my sister told me that that guys that take girls or women to hear jazz, it means they can't dance.
What?
Something like this. And she was like, anytime someone would take her to hear jazz, she was like, it's because he can't dance. He doesn't want to have to dance. I don't know if that's true or not, but jazz is brilliant for its spontaneity, right? Because with jazz, you don't know what's going to happen. That's the fun. That's the fun of it.
I see. Yeah, jazz is all about breaking rules, right?
All about breaking rules. And maybe people dance at jazz concerts. I don't know. But anyway, sorry. It popped in my head. This is the thing about doing a podcast after 6 p.m. I'm out of GABA, so I really just will say whatever comes to mind.
Oh, man. That's so amazing, though, because, I thought of so many things. You think of great athletes like LeBron James, Michael Jordan, when he did the dunk contest where he jumped from the free throw line, that broke, I think at that time was like, wait, no one's jumped from the free throw line. Or I was thinking of Saquon Barkley, a great running back, running through the line, and he cuts to a point where he breaks the rules of space. He separates space so much so fast that you're like, wait. It's just this awe moment because
you hadn't seen it before.
You haven't seen it.
How do you do that? The bottle fell up, not down.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And when that happens, that element of surprise, and here I'm quoting David Eagleman, who's got a great book on neuroplasticity called Live Wired, and he didn't tell me to say that. It's just a really cool book, and he's a great scientist and great guy. He says, one of the strongest triggers for plasticity is surprise, like that element of surprise. Like, wait, what? And kids are all about that. It's like, they're all about surprise, and a lot of their best toys are about surprise and things popping out. I think one of the reasons you see kids so mesmerized by the iPad is because there's a lot of motion there. There's a lot of visual motion. The real world, there's not a lot of visual motion in comparison to what's going on a screen. So, but in terms of creativity, you have to have the core set of operations dialed in. Like, expertise is required for creativity. And you just have to have those.
That's important, right? Because I was thinking some of the best athletes in the world are incredibly creative or have that potential, but it comes from so much repetitions and work, or musicians that master their voice that have several octaves of range and control, but all this time that they put in. You obviously have some God-given gift, talent, but the work, it's a lot of work, right? But that opens the door to exceptional creativity.
Absolutely. Right? Fundamentals are the foundation of creativity. You can't be, it's like, I do love poetry, and occasionally you'll read a piece of poetry or you'll hear a song. Like, I'm a big Joe Strummer fan, from the, singer for the Clash. I actually don't really like the Clash much. I lose punk points for saying that, but the stuff he did with the Mescaleros later in life, it's incredible. It makes me feel all sorts of incredible things as he's singing it. And I don't understand what he's talking about half the time. Bob Dylan, there's a lot of songs that way too, where really, true, strongly creative people, it's almost at a subconscious level that you're realizing emotions. You're not realizing linear sentences in this, or declarative sentences, or it's and we're getting abstract here, but there's something there that's universal, and we don't even know what it is, right? And I think in sport, you absolutely have to have the core elements. One person I think that deserves a reference in this context, and it's somebody I know we both appreciate so much, his work. I've never met him, but we've had some exchanges. Ido Portal, like his stuff is just, it's so beyond what I think about in terms of movement, and I think the enormous, popularity that his whole movement culture has brought is. He's organizing existing elements in ways that are completely unpredicted, sometimes even just the speed of movement. And also the things he writes about it are really interesting. He had a post that he talked about suppleness, like, because you hear about explosiveness and flexibility, but this notion of suppleness and the visual representation of suppleness. And I don't want to tread too far here because I don't know that work in detail enough to be able to talk about it intelligently, but everything I see of this is like, to me, it just shines of creativity, because I never know what to expect. But what I do see makes me think, oh my goodness, that's possible.
Yeah.
Not for me to do it, maybe, but I doubt it, because he's that's not my goal. That's possible for the human animal. Yeah. And I've just never seen that before. So when he does something, I don't see him and say, oh, he's moving like a monkey or he's moving like a lizard. I go, it's totally new. Because he's bridged enough elements in new ways through speed, so space and time, right? Trajectory, half the time I don't even know which direction he's going to go. And some other elements that I don't even really know that we have a language for. And it's just pure poetry and power in what you see. And we see this from time to time. We get little glimpses. And when somebody's badly creative, it too. Because it's got that trivial thing of don't worry, the way we describe the don't worry, be happy thing. So you've got your Idos on one end of the continuum that are just so far beyond anyone else in terms of creativity in their space, and everyone can appreciate it. That's what's cool. You don't have to be a movement person to just look at that and go, that is amazing.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas like there's certain forms of creativity that are only going to be recognizable to the aficionados and the people in that field because they're making little minor tweaks that are kind of like inside ball. This is one of the reasons I love close contact card magicians. Before COVID, I was hanging out at Magic Castle a lot, and I'd go out there, and they're breaking all this. That's what magic is. They break space-time rules. You took the card, you ripped it up, you put it in your pocket, you thought it was there, and then at the end, they've got it fully intact in their hand, and you're like, how? But they know how to break the space-time rules so that you don't see what they don't want you to see. Anyway, you can tell I get really excited about this stuff because I don't know how it all works at a core mechanics level and a neural processing level, but there are these rules of space-time violation that just make life so much more interesting.
Yeah, now when I recognize a great creative or artist, I'm going to think, what rule did they just break? Or I think that'll hit me like, oh, they just broke some rule that I expected to happen that didn't, or they did something beyond what I expected to.
Think about it as like they break a rule, like there's a combination on a lock, let's say a 3-number combination. And the linear space-time operation would be to say the combination is like 15, 11, 7. Okay, and then it opens a vault, and the vault has all the things you expect. But creativity is like finding a new way to open the lock, that when you open the vault, there's a bunch of new things that depend on how you broke the lock, how you picked the lock. That's the way to think about it, because it's not just what rule they broke, it's all the new implications of that rule break. Yeah. It's what this means. And you don't think about it like the first time I guess there's a Tyson fight coming up against Roy Jones. And so the first time Mike Tyson, yeah, he's back.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, no, he's back in his 50s. He's looking,
Whoa.
They're both looking great. This is going to be an amazing fight. But the first time I saw a guy that big move that fast, and more importantly, that big, who could swivel his torso that far and that fast, like the ways that his style is so unique, that body form making those movements, it just shouldn't work that way, but it does. And it looks natural for him to do it. So what it meant is that a heavyweight could do that kind of like bobble toy kind of movement, and still have all that power.
So
right?
compact and so much power, instant power.
It still boggles my mind to see the way that's done. That's a really good example. It's just this unique blend of speed, power, size, flexibility. I'm probably missing some of the critical words here, but when rules are broken in these ways, it's beautiful, because it makes us realize that we're looking at life through a very fixed set of lenses. And the part that's also beautiful about it is that in order to break those rules, you have to have those fundamentals. Like you can't buy, there's no trampoline up to the top of the mountain. And I think one reason why a lot of really creative people, especially the artist types and the music types, sometimes they're a little weird, they're a little different. Sometimes they're not in linear processing. And so they're like looking at space and time differently all the time. And the opposite extreme, we didn't mention the opposite extreme. When you're stressed, you start looking at the world in very uncreative ways, because the more stressed you are, the more your space-time processing becomes if A, then B, if B, then C. Wait, hold on. Something happened, emergency. Okay, I need to call this. I need to do this. I need to do this. It's a very effective thing for safety. But that's why when people get up to high levels of expertise, they can start playing in that creative zone. This is like, our friend Laird Hamilton, right? If a bigger wave comes in, I don't know anything about surfing either, but if a wave comes in and it's different and there's a whole set of new things that he's never seen before, that's an opportunity for him. That's an opportunity for me to get killed. That's an opportunity for him to be creative, because it requires new organization of space and time elements. And so the first time people saw him surf on the foil, like that really long, you go, oh my God, I never thought that you could surf above the water. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But then you go, wow, like everything's changed now, because he can ride, for 6 minutes or whatever, probably longer.
Yeah. That's brilliant, huh? That he did that.
It's brilliant. And it came from his deep understanding of fluid mechanics. The fact that the most powerful portion of the wave is beneath the water,
surface, yeah.
deep, and putting, I'm getting the language wrong. Forgive me, Laird. Sorry. But that, building those foils that you could pull from the energy deeper in the ocean. And it's also wild even just to think about it. So you can almost, when you see him doing that, at least when I see him doing that, I think I can see kind of the deeper, like stronger energy of the ocean, but it looks like he's just flying. Yeah. It looks like he's just gliding along. And so it's this mismatch of the deeper like gears of the ocean, and then this almost effortless, although I know it's a lot of physical work to do that properly. And it's incredible.
Yeah, I wonder his conversation with the wave. I'm not a surfer either, so I have no idea, but accessing the power, like you said, below the surface, I wonder, it's probably a completely different experience. To a certain degree, right?
It has to
be. Still the same wave essentially, but riding it from below or underneath the surface and above, it's probably like a whole new canvas for him, I would imagine.
It has to be. It's funny. The other day I was taking a walk and I was thinking about creativity. I'm supposed to be writing this book, and I'm like, it's really hard for me to put they always say you're not supposed to work things out by saying them out loud. Like that's kind of, a lot. I'm much quicker on speaking than writing, and that's the frustration. So I was recording something on creativity, and I was walking around and getting some funny stares. I started to realize that, like, what if the same rules carry over to relationships of all kinds? Like, because when you first got Jax, like, he's genetically bound to you guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the rules early on are pretty simple. It's like feed them, change them, But over time, you start to learn the people's patterns, and you start to learn, because we were talking about a relationship to a craft, but the relationship between people also has certain core elements, right? Like, I don't know, like she likes to wake up at this time, and she likes her tea, and so you don't want to start messing with that stuff, right? Because predictability is a big part of safety. But I started thinking about, creativity and the kind of depth of relationship is kind of an interesting one too. I think about this with my dog because he's getting towards the end. And I think at the beginning, I just wanted to keep him alive. I wanted to get some sleep. I wanted to house train him. I wanted him to attach to me. There were a bunch of like basic things. And now it's like, I'm probably making this stuff up in my mind, but I almost feel like because he's a dog, there's a dialogue there where I'm, maybe pausing for a couple more seconds when we walk. He likes to pause a long time. He likes to spend an hour sniffing at something. He's a bulldog. He's an intellectual. He's thinking. there are these little ways that we can change the way that we relate in creative ways too, that are not drastically disrupting the space-time rules, because predictability is so important in a relationship. But I realize that if the same thing is true where it's about taking existing elements and slightly rearranging them in time in ways that open up new possibility. I was thinking about this because I have a lot of friends who are in very happy relationships, and unfortunately I have a lot of friends who've also reached these point where the relationships sort of like hit this wall. And there's always this like thirst for novelty, but the thirst for novelty never seems to feed back into the relationship. It usually seems to break it. So I was thinking, wouldn't it be interesting if we could figure out how creativity works in terms of craft? And then someday someone might think of how, by rearranging just subtly certain space-time variations, maybe it's like, I don't know, tearing down a wall and putting in like a glass wall that looks out on a forest or something. Like maybe it would be something like that. Maybe it would just be different ways of relating verbally or something in ways that open up all sorts of new possibility. Because in the end, the dopamine system and excitement about the future and motivation is all about possibility. And that's why when people work really hard to attain something and they get it, oftentimes they're like, oh, what now? Well, the dopamine system shut down. The reward is attached to effort and motivation and direction, right? Vector, as we say, not to the goal line. So I thought, I don't have any ideas about how to do this, and I'd be the last person to devise this relationship-based creativity thing, except maybe to dogs. But I think that there's something there, because in the end, the most important thing to understand about the brain is it's a bunch of core operations for stress, for sleep, for focus, for task switching, for creativity, that were designed to be generic so they could be applied to any scenario, not just to a tiger or not just to, marriage for 5 years or marriage for 20 years. And we're a smart species. Like, we can do way better than we're doing right now. And it always makes me think, like, creativity is really just about opening up these new rule sets. And wouldn't it be cool if we could figure that out for the relationships that matter most, right? Like, I don't want to see anyone stay in bad situations that are like abusive or really bad for either party. But wouldn't that be cool? Because once you start to feel new possibility, everything changes. Everything, even if it's just like one category of things. Yeah. So anyway, I don't have any ideas, but maybe one of the listeners will implement my crazy idea and go build some system.
You have ideas because you said even just maybe tear out this wall, because you think about possibly a relationship, if there's an ability to change, that physical environment could spark, that's opening an actual like physical window to see that could change the energy of a room, that could change the potential energy of interaction in that room. I was also thinking in relationships, there's this idea of who's in charge. If you can get tired if you feel like you're doing everything, right? So
invert the power hierarchy.
Yeah, shuttle that between it's like if your relationship's like a blank piece of paper here, like this, it's like this art canvas that you can fill up, right? But when you're in sync and making art together, it's beautiful. But sometimes there's this shuttle between, okay, I've been painting for like 5 years. Like, maybe you should start painting, or if you start to have this conversation of, maybe I take the lead on the paint and then I give the brush to you, and now let's see what you make out of this, that kind of analogy. But
because absolutely. I mean, I think, and I have a hidden agenda in this, which is, I feel like I feel like I would like to see a world where there were more complete families, whatever that looks like to people. And I think a lot of the suffering in the world has to do with people just not feeling like they have it's a human thing, and all animals need to know that there's a kind of a core foundation of safety. From there, they can try new things. They can be more, more adventurous in life. And I think that a lot of I don't want to get into the woes of society, but it's certainly not my place to comment on. But I think that the 80s and 90s and 2000s showed us that, given the opportunity, a lot of times people will walk away from commitments of various kinds. And I'm assuming they had good reasons to do it in most cases. So it's kind of interesting to just think about, like, said differently, like, what is this realm of possibilities in terms of human connection? and not just in couples, but like animal to human connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the realm of, and of course I'm referring to like good space-time rule breaks have to be a couple things. They have to obey the rules of ethics, right? I'm not talking about just breaking rules here, by the way. People like, because that's not interesting. It's not creative. It's destructive, right? So it has to be bound. You can't break the rules. It's like the football example. It's like you can't decide, no, you know what? Like I'm gonna just turn around and go the other end zone because it's closer. Haha, that's not a touchdown.
You're talking about depth.
I'm talking about depth, like taking the existing rules and moving through those. And I think that in human relationships, and these could be business relationships too, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. I actually think that the pandemic's been terrible for so many reasons. All the consequences, just blah. But one of the things that's kind of interesting is that I heard this on a different podcast recently, is that, it used to be in a meeting, there was the person in charge, there was the white person had control of the whiteboard. Well, now with Zoom, like everyone has control of the whiteboard. Yeah. So it's more democratic in many ways. And so it was a rule that was forced on us. We didn't want to have to do things this way, but it leads to new solutions. And this is what humans are really good at, is finding new solutions.
I want to, we're talking about space-time and creativity. I'm curious about dreams because, artists will have, even myself, I play guitar, write songs. I've had songs in a dream state come completely crystal clear, all the words, and I know that there's artists that write music from their dreams. What's that about that? It's like there's this aspect of this unconscious or this other state of the brain that you've mentioned abstract, but opens the door to different realms of possibility, different spot, what is that?
Yeah. So in stress, you're very alert, and space and time are analyzed in very rigid preset rule type ways. In deep states of deep relaxation, like sleep and dreams, space and time, it's like no rules. And that's the amazing thing, right? Like, people can fly, you can fly, dead people can walk around that are alive. All the rules are off. Space and now the question is always what you bring back from that. So the transition into sleep and the transition out of sleep have been written about and talked about over many thousands of years as important periods that are as important as the dreams themselves. And I'm a big believer in this. I'm also, I think every time I say do any kind of like public teaching, I always talk about yoga nidra or hypnosis or anything that brings the brain into states of deep relaxation and the body into states of deep relaxation, is when you start to see rule breaks. You start getting breaks in the typical way that you organize information. And sometimes new solutions pop up. This is why, like, if you're ever working hard on a problem, you can't figure it out, and then you're like, fine, I'll just step away from it, and you're showering or you walk away and you're thinking about something different, and all of a sudden it pops in your head. You're like, how'd it work? Well, your brain was shuffling the deck and then splaying out the cards and going, no, shuffling the deck. It was doing that subconsciously for you. But you had given it the intention, we hear about intentions, to shuffle the deck and try and find an organization of the cards that is, I don't know, the equivalent of the perfect, what. I don't play cards either. Flush. I don't do anything. I just talk.
You do science.
No. I do science. I do neuroscience. But I don't play cards. When I go to casinos, which I do enjoy doing, by the way, because it's mindless for me, I sit down, I play roulette.
You do?
I do. I love roulette. I give myself a certain amount of money that I'm willing to lose. I'm always tempted to put it all on red or all on black and just call it a night one way or the other. But I just like I like hearing the ball go tick, 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 and when it lands, I'm like, oh. And when it hits, it feels so good. So I love doing that. And also, it's just totally mindless. You need no skill. Whereas like the craps table or blackjack, it looks like there's actually some math involved. So I go to there to relax. But now I outed myself. So when I really need to decompress from work, I get a ticket out to Vegas, and I just go and I book myself into a hotel by myself, and I just play roulette.
Wow.
Is weird. And then I always go home like a day and a half later, like so reset. Or I'll go into nature. But yeah, I'll escape. If you ever can't get a hold of me, I'm in Vegas. I'm not condoning gambling, but I don't.
I wonder how much is the sound and how much is just the predictable and why is it such a release, do you think?
I think it's just because so much of my life is about trying to be linear and organize things and respond to all the incoming and get it right. And I hate to, disappoint people. And I want to take care of my lab and my family and my dog and all this stuff, my friends. And then when they're like, all I have to worry about is if the ball lands on whatever, black 31. And if it doesn't, it's not such a big deal. I think I finally just get to turn off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also like the order of it. I like that they shuffle the thing and then I feel like there's a contract and it's very simple. Anyway, I don't know what you got onto that, but
yeah,
there's nothing creative about gambling, on the roulette table.
I use binaural beats a lot to access. I mean, you don't have to go into an in-depth lesson, but on brain waves, like a theta or delta, like a slower brain wave. So this is what I hear. Conscious brain, subconscious or unconscious is a slower brain wave. So putting on binaural beats, does that really help assist my brain to, does my brain pick up on that, the difference of the beats and then attune to a slow, so can I attune myself to a theta, delta, slower wave? And when you mentioned attention, or even earlier when you had me rub down the table, just doing that, you feel the awareness of doing that motion. But when you said feel the stripes, there's stripes in this table, immediately my brain picked up on the stripes, and then you can pick up the gap between the lines. But it's because you brought that to my awareness, and immediately I was picking up the gaps, like what you said. So that power of intention, and can I visit, you go to the craps or the roulette table to decompress. Can I use binaural beats, and can I be mindful of my intention to set my brain in the environment to then be creative or solve problems that if I'm stressed and linear thinking that I don't have access, because everything's so solid in that state.
So the one way to think about the kind of rigidity space-time stuff first is kind of driving. Like, are you going to stay in the lane lines, or are you allowed to cross over the lane lines? In dreams, like, the lane lines disappear, right? And when we're stressed, it's like you have to stay in the lane lines. So binaural beats are interesting. We tend to, so there's a word that's important here called entrainment. So entrain, ment, entrainment. And our nervous system entrains to external stimuli. So one of the best examples of this is our brain is entrained to the light-dark cycle of the sun. It's no coincidence that every cell in our body has a 24-hour clock. The Earth spins once about every 24 hours. And that is not a coincidence, folks. Okay, that is. It's clear there's an adaptive advantage to that, and because we are a diurnal species, we do best in the day, being awake in the daytime and asleep at night. For even if you can invert that schedule with artificial lights, and because you feel better being up at night, like health-wise, it's just you live longer, you do better, you resist infection, all that stuff if you're matched to the light-dark cycle. So we're entrained to the light-dark cycle, or if we decide we're not, we can pull ourselves off that. We will also entrain to shorter rhythms. So we entrain to ultradian rhythms. Every 90 minutes, we tend to go through a cycle of increased focus, and then it drops off at the end, last 20 or 30 minutes, and then it repeats. In sleep, every 90 minutes, we cycle back and forth between slow wave sleep and REM sleep, with a higher percentage of that being REM sleep toward morning. More REM toward morning. So we entrain to lots of different things, and we can entrain to anything. This is what's kind of cool. So maybe it's with the roulette table example. Every time they throw the ball in there, like, I'm entraining to, there's another roulette spin. So the expectation is for that thing. That's what my dopamine system or whatever is oriented towards, is the ball clickety clackety in the spinning wheel. Binaural beats are an interesting case because I'm not sure exactly what pattern of beats will draw the brain into one rhythm or one brainwave state or another. But we know that there is this property that could sort of be described as metronoming, where if you're listening to a metronome going tick, 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 your brain processes space and time information differently than if it's tick, 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 it's kind of frames per second, like with the slower one being fewer frames per second. And when it's unpredictable, when it's tick, 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 right, when it starts being random, that's when the brain starts getting kind of higher levels of alertness, because it's sort of like expectation, what's going to happen, and you can't really follow. And if you can't follow, then the brain tends to drop into states that are more highly relaxing. Think the lava lamp. It's like you never know which direction it's going to go. You can watch it for a while, and then eventually you're kind of like, ooh, and away you go, right? Whereas if bubbles are kind of coming out of something and it's very linear, that you can predict it with a high degree of certainty when the next bubble is going to come, then it tends, those kinds of visual images tend, and auditory too, tick, tick, tick could be the equivalent of the bubbles as opposed to just random ticks, will tend to place the brain into higher levels of alertness. Again, because the brain is a prediction machine, but it works both ways. More so than the speed that things are coming in. If you know what the speed is, at that point, your brain goes, oh, I don't need to follow this anymore. And actually, this is such a profound thing in the visual system, where if information is very constant in the visual system, and this has been done experimentally, images disappear to you consciously. So like if I, if I were to walk in and if at some point, like if certain things are regular enough in my visual field, they literally disappear. And a lot of camouflage relies on this. It's not just colors. It's about creating a frequency of pattern in the camouflage that matches the background to the point where you just disappear because there's regularity. Whereas if tigers were just one big yellow, or blue animal, they wouldn't camouflage well. The stripes break up patterns in ways that match the jungle or the environment they happen to be in. And so anyone out there who's who's a sniper or has spent some time in the military or likes animal camouflage, which I do. I'm not a sniper. I didn't spend time in the military, but I love animal camouflage. It's all about breaking patterns in a way that's that's very consistent with the environment. And some environments are very unpredictable, so they break patterns in unpredictable ways, like the stripes on the tiger. It's all about lack of periodicity, meaning the distance between the stripes. So this whole time that we've been in this discussion, we've been jumping back and forth between space domain and time domain. And when I say space, I literally just mean like things that are like stripes, or things are organized in space. And time is just the distance in that different space events have relative to one another. Again, this is not like quantal. This is not like cosmos type stuff. So when you listen to binaural beats, I think it does work to shift your brain state. The question that I have, and I haven't looked at the research on this, is what binaural beat pattern will shift the brain toward a particular state. But I think we can use the general categories of the more relaxed the brain is without being completely asleep, the more you're going to be able to access these breaks in space-time rules and kind of have creative mindset. The more regular the predictions are, the more linear typically you're going to be about your analysis of things.
So that's interesting. So like the binaural beat could be effective, but it could lose its effectiveness if you play the same track over and over, and the brain starts to predict it.
That's
even
right.
The frequencies, now it stops paying attention, or even heightens its state.
Yeah, and it depends on what operation you want to carry out. So like there are a lot of people out there that not a lot, but there's some people out there that will listen to the same song on repeat when they need to work. This is a really good example. They need a certain amount of background chatter in order to be able to focus. But if the background chatter is changing too much, then they're not able to focus, because it's like the novelty is what cues the brain. So obviously when you play a song, it's not like it's the same note over and over. That would be mind-numbing for me, but maybe that would work for some people. But your brain, eventually, if it hears things enough times, it knows what to predict, so it stops paying attention to that. So in the same way that, like, if I look at the same pattern of something and the pattern is unbroken and just repeating for a long stretch of time or space, eventually the image literally disappears to your conscious mind, even though the retina is still seeing it. And they've done these experiments by a limit. That's why your eyes move. Your eyes have these little microsaccades, like they're the kind of like movements to specific locations in space, but they do these little microsaccades, little micro movements. And that's so that images on your retina don't disappear. Because if they were, the brain is a statistics machine. It goes, seen that, seen that, seen that, seen that, and it goes.
Or driving late at night when you see the lines, like if you know,
it's hypnotic, and
it's
your
hypnotic.
mind will go elsewhere. The magicians they haven't given me all their secrets, but I'm working on them. Because I promised I wouldn't give them away, but a lot of what they do, like if they count out cards for you, they go, count with me. They go 1, 2, 3. They're trying to entrain you to a particular space-time pattern. Meanwhile, they're doing things right in front of you, and you actually don't see it. It's not you missed it. It wasn't like they quickly did something. They can do things, and I've seen this, where they literally can reach out and change things right in front of you, and you are blind to that event.
That's fascinating.
They're so good. They're so good. If any, there are a couple. There's a guy I think he's in New York, who I saw a show, Ozzy Mind, I think is his name. I think he's Israeli. He's in New York. I'm still kind of disturbed, awed, troubled by some of. He had me sign my name on a card, and then rip it up. I did it with my own hands and put it in my pocket. Then we went through a thing. We were sitting right next to each other. And then a couple minutes later, I went into my pocket and it wasn't there. And I'm like, that's weird. And then he produced the card fully intact with my name written on it from his shoe.
What? How's it possible?
I don't know. He if you know how to break the space-time rules in the right sequence, you can do that kind of stuff. And I think he's considered one of the very, very best in that kind of thing. And it's messed up, and it's really cool.
Like
and
David Blaine too, someone like.
Yeah, I mean, this scene, I think it even goes beyond. For me, it went beyond that experience because I was closely linked to it. But obviously Blaine is good at what he does. Very good at what he does.
Yeah.
I don't want him to make me disappear or something.
Is this similar with heart rate variability? Because a higher HRV score is actually the heart beating at random, right? Like that it's not in the same.
Yeah.
Am I thinking of that correctly? Like.
Yeah. So the autonomic nervous system tends to, it shifts us towards high heart rates or low heart rates, depending on where we are in terms of alertness or relaxation, sympathetic, parasympathetic, for those that use that language. And the heart rate variability is good. We know that because heart rate variability reflects the activity of the parasympathetic arm of the autonomic nervous system, which is the kind of calming arm of the nervous system. If you were to completely take away the calming aspect of the nervous system, the heart would beat really, really fast. So it sort of like always wants to go fast, but then there's a break, right? And actually, when you exhale, right, when you breathe out, the diaphragm moves up.
Mm-hmm.
When it does that, the heart actually gets compacted a little bit. Blood then flows faster through the heart because it's a smaller volume, and there's a little node that's called a little set of neurons sends a signal to the brain, and the brain sends a signal to slow down the heart rate. This is why exhaling slows down your heart rate.
Wow, that's cool.
And so there's a direct link between your breathing, your diaphragm, your heart rate, and the heart volume. And this is not like woo mystical stuff. This is like every physician learns this. And so heart rate variability is how many times like the brake has been deployed. The brake being the slow down, calm, and relax thing. So if your heart's like consistently sitting up here all the time and you never get that variability, that's not good. But a lot of heart rate variability is good. Now, whether or not how the heart entrains space-time analysis in the brain, I don't know, because a lot of the space-time stuff in the brain has to do with like neural events and chemical events. But Roger Penrose, who just won the Nobel Prize in physics, has a really great theory that neurons aren't just about sending action potentials, but that it's actually not quantal, but that it's like about the microtubules, and that we're not thinking about the math of the brain quite right. And he's far, far smarter than I'll ever be. And I listened to him talk about this, and at first I thought, oh no, here's another Nobel Prize winner who's like, who's diving into neuroscience and thinks they can say something. But it actually hung together pretty well, and he may be onto something. So he definitely understands the space-time relationships of the brain, but he's arguing that maybe there's some math that the rest of us mere mortals don't understand, that folks like him can understand. And hey, that's why they make guys like Roger Penrose.
That's a great last name.
Oh yeah, especially if you're going to win a Nobel. And also, I've never met him. I feel safe saying this, but like I have some friends at Cambridge. I used to go to Cambridge University a couple times a year to visit, and there's a certain style of discourse, even the way they sit, like, you know, and like Penrose is like, if you had to draw a Cambridge professor, you right down to the sweater, it would be Penrose. And congrats on your Nobel, Roger. You deserve 2.
Yeah. Who can win can you win a Nobel Prize?
I won't win a Nobel. Can anyone?
Or who can? Do you have to be a neuroscientist?
Oh,
or
no,
a
no,
mathematician?
no. The Nobel is given in a couple different categories. I'm totally geeking on this. Now, this I can really, you know. The Nobel has a couple categories. One is it's called physiology or medicine. So that would be for kind of biology, or this, you know, this year it was for like hepatitis C, discover hepatitis C and its treatment. Oh no, sorry. That was last year. Was that? Yeah, that's right. Because Doudna and and her name is
it wasn't long ago.
Chantillier, yeah, Doudna and Chantillier. Doudna's in Berkeley and Chantillier is in Europe. Those 2 women won the Nobel in chemistry for CRISPR, for gene editing. So they give it for chemistry, for physiology and medicine, for physics, economics, and then there's a Peace Prize. The Peace Prize is a little bit different because the Peace Prize, they actually announce who got nominated before they announce who got it. Obama won the Peace Prize. I think Mother Teresa won the Peace Prize. And then there's a Poetry Prize. Bob Dylan won the Poetry Prize.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But he didn't go pick it up.
Why?
I don't know. He's Dylan. He's like, he's creative. I don't know. Too busy.
Oh, man.
But yeah, it's the Nobel is cool because like for scientists, it's like the one time a year when like anyone pays attention. But no scientist does science to get Nobels or get any prize. And there are prizes that give way more money, like the Kyoto Prize or the X, I think it's called like the X Prize or something like that. But it's cool because it has a long history. You know, some people hate it because of like the dynamite story and like they invented dynamite. You know, Nobel invented dynamite. I think he killed his brother.
Really?
I think so. Yeah. So there's always some darkness around some lightness, but
I just think of prestigious, like.
A Nobel Prize definitely allows somebody to say all sorts of things, and sometimes Nobels have gone completely off the rails and started talking about things they had no place talking about.
Madness and brilliancy, are they? Not always.
You know, the Nobels in things like physics and chemistry and biology tend to be given to people who can achieve very linear thinking. I mean, no matter how far out at the edge you go, if you don't bring anything back that can be implemented, you're just another crazy person, right? And there are a lot of crazy people out there who have brilliant ideas that never implement. But of course, at the other extreme are people that all they can do is implement the same space-time rules. And, you know, they can get as good at what they do as a diving bird can get at what it does. And we see athletes like this, we see artists like this, we see scientists like this, but they're not, again, what I mean is ethical rule breakers. They don't know how to break the rules of their game in a way that's still within the ethics and so they look like they're kind of turning a crank. And you know, every team needs some of those. Every profession needs some of those. But those generally aren't the people that they help the world go round, but they aren't the people that really change the trajectory of humanity.
It's interesting to hear you talk about the neuroscience behind creativity, but then because the creative, they just create. And it's like they're not thinking about why or how it happens.
Right.
It's just, you know what I mean?
Right. Well, this is right. So it's like I'm intellectualizing a lot here. And I should be clear, to me, an intellectual isn't somebody that like uses a lot of fancy language. An intellectual is somebody that can appreciate and describe something at a lot of different levels of granularity. And I'm giving a lot of words to a process that most people, as you point out, they probably don't even know they don't know how they do it. They might even not realize they do it. But
the awareness could open the door to even greater creativity, I think. Because if you understand, oh, this is what I've been doing, and just by shining that light could open the door to 10 other doors, you know, or just really open things up for that creative person that maybe they weren't aware that they could tweak a little thing and have all kinds of new ideas pop. You know what I mean? I think.
Or map their activities to points of the day. Like, for instance, if you want to do, if you're very alert, like first thing in the morning, or you're very alert at a certain time of day, like you're going to be great for linear type operations. If you're a little sleepier, that's a great time to start playing with new space-time rules. Now, some of it may be terrible, right? But some of it might be sticky and would work. And I think that, so you can start to think of this alertness, calmness thing and that continuum as a way to place yourself into a better opportunity to be creative or better opportunity to implement. I think
that's super smart, because I'm just thinking naturally I wake up and want to write or be creative, but some people, my wife wakes up and wants to do yoga or be active. So just the awareness of,
when
what
are
do
you,
I do?
when are you linear, when are you not? I actually, creatives, the real extremes are amazing, because a few years ago, I was many years ago, I was like 10 years ago, I was living in San Francisco and I wanted to go see the Pogues play. Right. And so for anyone who knows the Pogues, like Shane MacGowan is like singer for the Pogues, and this guy is like on a totally different dimension. So that day I went out early because I was staying at a hotel in the city, and I see this guy walking down the street and he's like stumbling, and he's got a brand new shirt on. It's got the tag hanging off it. And he's just kind of like shuffling along. And I was like, oh man, that poor guy. Like, he's in San Francisco. We got all these like, mental health issues and stuff. And then that was MacGowan. So that night he gets up on stage and he's just like everything. He's just so on point. He just killed. And I was like, wow, these creatives, like, they often need handlers. They need people that can be like, hey, we need to have lunch at this time and do this, because they never snap out of that thing. I think it's also one of the reasons why really creative people, sadly, get involved in narcotics, or that, like narcotics. They take heroin, they take opiates. They tend to gravitate towards drugs that put them into these very like fluid states that are not that are damaging to the body and brain. But for them, that's also been the creative state, not the drug, but the creative state has been a great source of growth for their career. So the ability to access creative states, or linear states for that matter, without the use of destructive drugs like heroin, which is a highly destructive drug, right, would be wonderful. And I think there's a whole future ahead of us where machines, binaural beats, VR, maybe safer drugs, pharmacology, better, safer pharmacology, would help people access these states of mind that are important. I mean, there's so many, if you just think back, so many highly creative people have died of opioid or heroin overdose. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, it can't be coincidental. It just can't be coincidental. And I'm not saying definitely not saying anyone should go do those drugs. I think the ability to access creative states without them is really the goal. But I have a feeling they gravitate towards those things for a reason.
Because it's familiar, or it's...
Yeah, you don't hear about too many football players dying of heroin,
mm-hmm.
right? They have other issues if they have issues, but you just don't, it's just a different thing altogether. And there are other reasons for it, but space-time fluidity and those kind of sedated mindsets, maybe that's how they are able to access their craft, but, it'd be great if they could do it without those things.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We just need to get you the roulette wheel. And what else did you need?
Well, I like
the animal camo.
I like the I like going to, there's just something about sitting down at that table. I don't have to worry about anything. I'm not a big drinker, but I'll have like a drink and just, I don't know, just play. It's just fun. And the idea that your room is just above you and you just go back up there. But it's good that I can control it. I don't spend a lot of money on it. I won't mention what I do spend, but and I've walked, by the way, to the people who own the casinos, I've left Las Vegas with their money, so I don't feel too bad about it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy this show, please subscribe, share with your friends, and leave a 5-star review. Every listener matters to us, so please leave your comments along the way to let us know how we're doing. Until next time, wishing you all the wealth, health, and happiness in the world.